Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are unpacking one of the least talked about, yet absolutely mind-boggling environmental disasters in all of US history. We're starting off with a scenario that, honestly, seems like it's pulled straight out of a Cold War sci-fi thriller. But I promise you, every bit of this is entirely real.
Just imagine this for a second. What if a deadly secret was growing right beneath the streets of a picture-perfect American town? Today, we're going to look at exactly how an idyllic reality can hide an absolute nightmare.
Setting the stage with Section 1, The Perfect American Dream, a 1950s utopia.
So, in the 1950s, this small town literally had it all. Picture your quintessential post-war boom. We're talking kids playing safely outside until the streetlights came on, right? New homes were going up at lightning speed to house growing families, and there was this widespread, deeply held belief that the future was going to be nothing but bright. This wasn't just a place to live, it was the literal manifestation of the American dream. On the surface, everything looked perfectly normal.
But that brings us to Section 2, the invisible hidden danger, a silent threat. Because while those families were so focused on their bright futures, a really dark reality was unfolding just out of sight. Scientists working at a nearby facility were handling highly radioactive materials. And meanwhile, these tiny, invisible radioactive particles were slowly but relentlessly spreading right into the soil and the water. And the crazy part? The residents had absolutely no idea. I mean, think about that for a second. Kids were playing in contaminated dirt, families were drinking contaminated water, completely unaware of the poison just surrounding them.
It's wild to think about how this built up over time. The danger started in the 50s, exactly when the town was booming. In that same era, scientists nearby are handling those materials. This wasn't some sudden massive explosion. No, it was a creeping, invisible danger spreading completely silently. It actually took years before anyone even realized something was terribly wrong. That continuous, unchecked exposure. Honestly, it's the most terrifying part of this whole timeline.
Which leads us to Section 3, the screaming detectors. The investigation begins.
When government inspectors finally showed up to survey the area, the shock was immediate. Their radiation detectors basically started screaming. Imagine walking down a quiet, leafy suburban street. Birds chirping, and the only other sound is the frantic, high-pitched shrieking of a Geiger counter going completely off the charts. The invisible threat was suddenly making itself very, very known.
The sheer scale of what they found was just staggering. Inspectors quickly learned that entire neighborhoods, not just a yard or two, but whole neighborhoods, showed dangerous levels of contamination. It was completely systemic. And to make matters worse, they realized some of these houses were entirely impossible to clean. The radioactive dust had settled so deeply into the wood, the structures, the environment, you just couldn't scrub it away.
So, government officials suddenly face this impossible dilemma. Do you leave people there in homes that are fundamentally toxic, risking their health every single day? Or do you make the agonizing call to destroy an entire community, uprooting lives and completely erasing a town from the map?
Here's what happened in Section 4. The town disappears, erasing a community.
Erasing a town is this chillingly bureaucratic process. First, the government steps in and buys the homes, one by one. Then, families are forced to just pack up everything they own, leaving behind their dreams and their history. Next, the schools and local businesses close their doors forever, so the whole social fabric of the community just dissolves. And finally, nature slowly takes over the land. It is such a highly clinical process for what is ultimately an incredibly emotional human tragedy.
Roads that once echoed with children's laughter became completely silent. Today, much of this town simply no longer exists the way it once did. The houses are gone, the foundations are buried in the dirt, and those once busy streets are now defined by a complete, eerie silence. Nature has totally reclaimed this piece of the American dream.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, the silent lesson, the true horror.
The true horror of this whole event isn't even just the radiation itself. It's the absolute normalcy that surrounded it. There were no explosions, no warning sirens going off in the middle of the night. It was just everyday life. Mowing the lawn, going to work, sending the kids off to school, right up until science finally caught up with the invisible danger. The ultimate threat was perfectly hidden right inside the mundane.
Thousands. That is the number of everyday Americans who were forced to pack up and leave their lives behind forever. These were real people who lost their community, their home equity, their entire sense of safety, all because of something they couldn't even see. To put that into perspective, that's entire school districts worth of families just gone.
Yet despite the massive scale of this tragedy and the displacement of all those thousands of people, this remains one of the least talked about environmental disasters in U.S. history. It doesn't have the widespread name recognition of other major industrial accidents. And, maybe that's because the destruction wasn't some sudden, highly televised blast. It was just a slow, quiet, invisible erasure.
I want to leave you with a final thought from our source material that really hits the nail on the head. Quote, "If someone drove past this place today, they'd never guess what happened here. Some of America's biggest mysteries aren't hidden in Area 51. They're hiding in forgotten neighborhoods." It's a pretty powerful reminder that the most unbelievable true stories are often hiding right under our noses, in everyday, forgotten places. So, what other invisible histories might be buried right in our own backyards? Keep questioning the history beneath your feet and stay curious. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.